Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the Chennai Grand Masters, a tournament which is taking place in India this week. Now, it's a very strong tournament featuring 8 of the top players in the world, but all eyes are on the current world number 4 ranked player, Arjun Erigaisi, because he has had a massive run in the last year or so, going from a little over 2,700 all the way up to very close to the 2,800 mark. Now, coming into this tournament, he's rated 2799, and we're going to start by taking a look at his first round game against Vidit Santosh Gujarati with the black pieces. So the game starts out with the move e4, we get c5, knight f3, e6 from Arjun, we get the move c4, and now we have the move knight c6. Now, c4 is a little bit unusual in this position. Normally, white plays d4 or a move like c3 in this position, but Vidit goes for the move c4. We get the move knight to c6, d4, takes, knight f6, knight c3, and now we get the move bishop c5. Now, the recent global chess league, I believe that the move bishop to b4 was played in game between Magnus Carlsen and Vishy Anand, but here Arjun goes for bishop c5. We get the move knight to b3, bishop to b4, and now we have the move bishop d3 guarding the pawn on e4. Arjun castles, Vidit castles, and now we get the move bishop takes knight, pawn takes, and this move d6. Now, the computer actually wants black to play the move d5 here, opening up the center of the board, but one thing that Arjun has been doing a lot of in recent times is it's sort of the living by the sword and dying by the sword, where he plays very aggressively, tries to create imbalanced positions, and does not want simplified positions because he wants to win every game. He is simply a madman. So we get the move d6. Bishop a3 played by Vidit, rook e8, and now we get to move rook to e1. Now in this position, you'll notice there's a big imbalance. You have these double c pawns on c4 and c3. However, white does have the 2 bishops. So white wants to maybe open up the diagonals or pressure this pawn on d6. Black is going to argue that with these weak pawns on c4 and c3, the position is actually very unstable. So we get the move queen c7. Vidit plays knight d4. We get the move a6, which stops knight to b5. And now we have the move knight takes knight. Here, Arjun captures with the queen, and now we get this move bishop to c2. Now, the computer actually much prefers this move c5 here, trying to rip open the diagonals for the bishops, because if black were to take on c5, now after e5, c4, bishop c2, and knight to d5, white can play queen g4, and suddenly the 2 b's on these diagonals are very, very active. Combine it with the queen, the rooks may be coming to the king side, and it starts to look like something where black could end up in a ton of trouble very, very quickly. So Vidit instead plays the move bishop to c2. We get the move queen takes pawn, and now we have the move queen takes pawn on d6, and here we get the move e5. Now Vidit plays bishop to b3, and you'll notice that white has these 2 very active bishops on the diagonal, and already it feels like Arjun is under a little bit of pressure. Arjun captures the pawn, we get rook c1, queen to a5, and now we have this move bishop b4 attacking the queen on a5 here. Arjun plays queen to d8, we get takes, rook to c7, creating the classic kebab here, attacking all the pawns on the 7th rank. Here we have the move rook to d7, we get rook c1, takes, and now we have the move bishop e6. Sorry about that, you guys, I got my order a little bit confused there for anybody who's watching the video, with the move rook d7 here. So we reach this position after bishop e6, takes, and now Vidit plays f3. Now this is really the starting point of the end game here. White is currently down 1 pawn on the queen side in this position. You're down this b pawn. However, black's other extra pawn will be the stacked pawns on e6 and e5. And when you look at the structure of the white 4 pawns here, bishop having the ability to go after the pawn on e5, white has a clear advantage here, and black is simply much worse with very little counterplay. So this game has gone very wrong for Arjun thus far. But for all the top players, one of the great hallmarks of the very top players, when they do struggle, they're very good at defending. Even when they get a bad position, they still defend with tooth and nail. So after f3, we get the move b5. Vidit plays a3 here. Bishop to c3 is also an option, but we get a3, a5, bishop to c3 now. We get b4, takes, and here we have the move rook a1. Vidit plays king f2, we get rook a2, king f1, and now we have the move check, king f2 check, and at this point, we get the move bishop e1. Now, Vidit decides to play on here. He could have simply made a draw with king f2, but he figures there is no risk. Both sides have the same number of pawns, but in this position, both the pawns on e6 and the pawn on e5 are very weak, and white should never be able to lose the game. So we get the move knight to h5. Vidit plays g3, cutting off the horse so it can't jump to the f4 square, and now we get the move knight to f6 back. Vidit plays rook e7, we get rook a3, king e2, rook to a6 here, and now we have the move bishop c3. Now at this point, Vidit has gotten the dream. It is clear that he's going to win one of these pawns, or e6 or e5, and Arjun is very likely going to lose the game. So Arjun plays king f8. We get rook to b7. Now we have rook to a2, and here we get the move bishop b2, blocking the rook from checking the king or winning the pawn on h2. Game continues with knight d7. We get king to e3, and now we have the move king e8. Here, Vidit plays h4. We get rook a5 here. The reasoning behind rook a5 is, let's just say black goes to h6. Now white can play rook b5, winning this pawn on the e5 square. So we get rook a5, rook c7, g6, g4, h5, and now we get the move g5. Now you will notice from the evaluation bar that Arjun has pretty much survived here, even though his pawn e5 is still weak. The rook and the knight are guarding the pawn. The king guards the knight here. It can also come up one square. Say you get a move like, just to illustrate the point, I'm just trying to set this up. So you get rook c6, king e7, for example. The knight guards the pawn, king guards this one, king guards the knight, rook guards this one, and you have mostly set up a bit of a fortress. So after g5, Arjun plays the move rook to a8. We get the move rook c6, king f7, and now we have the move king d3. Arjun plays rook b8. We get king c2, rook a8, and now we have rook c7, king e8, rook c6, king f7, and now there's a bunch of dilly-dallying here before we get to this very critical moment where rook b8 is shockingly a losing move. Now, this is very surprising, honestly, as a human to look at this, but in this position, computer basically tries to argue here that as long as this bishop cannot get on this diagonal to target everything, then black simply won't be losing. But once Arjun goes rook b8 and we get bishop to a3, now with the bishop coming on this diagonal, you have rook c7 putting pressure as well as rook c8 and rook d8. Black is apparently lost. So we get rook b1, rook c7, king e8, check, king f7, and now we get the move rook to d8. Now I think the computer here wanted some king c4. I think it wants some weird king c4, and apparently this is better. Honestly, for a human, this is very unnatural because there's ideas like rook c1 down the road, rook f1, rook h1, and you don't see a concrete way to win the pawn or the knight. So we get rook to d8 instead. Arjun plays knight b6. We get rook f8, king g7, and now the move rook f6. And at this point, Arjun is definitely going to lose something here. He's going to lose a pawn on e6 or g6 in this situation. So we get knight a4, king c4, knight b6, king c3, knight a4, king c2, and now we have the move rook b6, and here the move bishop f8 check is played. We get king h7, bishop to h6, and now the game continues with rook b2. Now I'm not going through all the little nuances of this exact endgame because frankly it's not really practical, I would say, for most of you guys viewers at home. Like the nuances are very deep. Even for me, there are a lot of these little things here that I don't completely understand here. Like for example, I think somewhere here, was it right back here, you're supposed to play rook e8, winning this pawn. Again, very, very deep. So we get to this position back here, bishop h6, rook b2, king d3, rook b7, and now we get the move bishop f8. White cannot play rook takes e6 here because then there would be knight to c5 check, forking the king and the rook, and you lose the game here. So we get the move bishop f8, stopping knight to c5, and now the game continues with knight b2. We get king e2, rook b6, and now we have bishop h6, and the move rook c6. Now apparently this is of course the losing move, but very hard to fault Arjun. After knight to a4, rook f7, in this position king h8, rook g7. Apparently here after rook b2, check, rook b2, if you go this way, there's some reason, I guess it's knight d3, knight f4 here, and then suddenly, not king e2, sorry, suddenly after knight to f4, black is completely fine, but both players are getting low on time. This has been a very, very long game up to this point, and Arjun simply plays rook c6 instead. Now we get rook f7, king h8, and here we get rook f8, king h7, check, and now the move rook g7. Now this is apparently not the best move here. Computer actually thinks rook to b7 is the winning move, simply because when black plays knight c4 here, you can go bishop g7, king g8, and now after bishop to f6, the bishop stays on f6 forever. It's a very classic wooden shield, but more importantly, the knight is glued guarding the pawn. You have rook g7 check as well, and this is simply game over on the spot. So instead we get the move rook g7, Arjun checks, we get king e3 check, king d2, and now we have the move rook takes f3. Now the reason this isn't so good is if you go king e2 here, again there's gonna be check, and we're gonna have the same problem here where there's always gonna be a knight d3, knight f4, and honestly at this point, if anybody's to be careful here, it will be white, because if you take the pawn, there's check, and now after king e2, there's knight f4 check, forking the king and the rook, king goes over, and after takes, now black is gonna win the pawn on f3, push the h pawn up the board, and win the game. So we get king d2, rook f3, rook g6, and now we have the move knight c4. Vidit plays king d1, Arjun goes rook to f4, and now we get rook takes pawn. Game continues with knight to e3. Important move, by the way, because if you were to take on h4, now after g6, it's spaghetti-o time. Bishop covers a square, pawn covers the other square, and rook d8 is simply checkmate. So we get knight to e3 here. Good move from Arjun, king d2. And now we get knight g4, which stops white from pushing the pawn to g6. White goes g6, you lose the bishop and the game. And now if you're unable to push g6 here, the king is never getting checkmated. And additionally, with even material on the board very soon and a rook endgame looming, it should be a draw. So Vidit goes king d3. We get king g8, rook e8, king h7. We get a bunch of checks again. And now we get the move bishop f8 here. Again, Vidit could make a draw with rook to e7, but he decides he wants to play on. We get knight to f2. Now we have king c4. Arjun takes on e4. We get king d5. And now we have the move rook takes h4 here. We get the move bishop to e7 being played, and Arjun goes rook g4. Now at this point, white is temporarily down a pawn. You should be able to capture it, but you do have to be a little bit careful here because the knight guards the queening square. Black's threatening to push p up the board, and if you don't get a checkmate very quickly, this pawn is going, and you could even end up losing. So we get the move king to e6. Arjun plays knight to e4, and now we get the move king f5. Arjun plays knight g3, and we get this move king takes e5. Now what's shocking about this move actually is a losing blunder in the position. If Vidit were to go king to e6 here, after knight to e4, game should end in a draw. And if black were to play h4, now you have bishop to f6 here. Ideas of h3, king f7 with rook h8 checkmate. And if black goes king g6, you can now go check, king h5, check, king g6, and rook to h6, checkmating the king on g6. Instead, Vidit plays this move king takes e5. Now, to be fair, this has been a very, very long game. Vidit's been pushing the whole time. He's been trying to win the game, and he probably just slips up thinking that it doesn't make any difference. But also, remember how many draw opportunities he simply eschewed during the course of this game. At least 6 or 7 times, he could have made a threefold repetition, but he's in his mind, he wants to play it out all the way. So he takes, and now Arjun correctly plays the move king g6, and after this move, suddenly Vidit is losing the game. Now, you're probably thinking, well, how can he be losing? The reason he's losing is if he ever moves the bishop, there's rook to e4, collecting the rook on e8. If you move the rook away, there's rook to e4 check, king d6, and then knight to f5, forking the king and the bishop. You lose the bishop and the game. So you can't really move this rook away. If you go check, there's king f7, hitting the rook and the bishop, and you lose one of the two. So you can't really move the rook away easily. Can't move the bishop. What is going on? So Vidit plays this move king to e6 here. Arjun checks. We get king d7. And now we have this move knight to f5. And at this point, Vidit basically is in tons of trouble because the g pawn is blockaded. You're pushing p with the h pawn going down the board. And here we get the move bishop d8. Arjun trades, and now he goes h4. And you'll notice his h pawn is going up the board. Vidit plays king d7, h3, bishop c7. And now we get the move king takes pawn. Game continues with king e6. Arjun plays king g4, and now Vidit plays bishop h2. Now the reason Vidit has to play bishop h2 is, let's just say you play a move like bishop b8. There's knight g3 here cutting off the diagonal, and I'm just pushing h2 h1 on the next turn and winning the game. And if you take the knight, I take, and now again I'm still pushing, getting a queen, and it's gg. So we get bishop to h2. Arjun plays knight g3. We get the move king f6, king f3, and here Vidit Santosh Gujarati has to resign this game very regrettably because he is going to lose this bishop. There's nothing he can really do, or black is going to get a queen. Sample line, bishop g1, king g2 here. Bishop can't go over. You have to move away, and again the pawn gets through. And if you play this move like king g5, king g2, king guards the knight, attacks the bishop, but it also guards the pawn on h3. So if you go king g4, I take, I still guard the pawn. I'm going to get a queen in a few moves and win the game. So an absolute heartbreaking loss for Vidit in this game. This really harkens back to one of the issues he's had in the past, which is in a lot of games where he has an advantage, he's pushing the whole way, where he gets low on time deep in the second time trial. He seems to make some blunders which have cost him dearly. I think about the candidates. I know some people are going to say, well, you're going to think about my games. But there's a game very deep in the candidates where he was actually pushing for quite a while against Jan Nepomniachtchi quite late in the tournament, and he blundered and he ended up losing that game, which cost him any chance of potentially winning the tournament. So this kind of reminds me a little bit of some older days of Vidit, where certain little things in his game he would make some mistakes. Nonetheless, it is a heartbreaker because when you play for 6 hours, you're better the whole game, you're pushing, you're trying to win the game, and then you make one slip at the end deep in the 6th hour and it costs you a game and you get 0 points. It is very, very harsh, and that's also why chess is such a brutal game, because for Vidit to lose this game is simply really unfair, if we're being honest. Nonetheless, Arjun takes advantage of a chance. You call it luck or whatnot, but he takes advantage of the opportunity and he gets a big win. Now, with this win, it temporarily pushed Arjun up to number 3 in the world. He surpassed me. I believe his rating was 2803 after this win. Now, round 2, he would draw against Levon Aronian. In round 3, he would have a very nice win against Alexei Sarana from Russia. And now we're going to move to the 4th round of the tournament, where he is playing with the black pieces once again against Amin Tabatabai from Iran. So Arjun is having a great event so far. He's on 2.5 points out of 3, gaining a bunch of points. If he wins this game, he will surpass Fabiano Caruana and move up to number 2 in the world. So the game starts out with the move e4. We get e5, knight f3, knight c6, and now we have the move bishop c4 from Amin. Now this, of course, is the classic Gucci piano as usual. We get knight f6, d3, bishop c5, castles, d6. We get the move c3, a6, a4, and now we have h6 being played. Now, h6 is a multi-purpose move. One of the main ideas is down the road, you want to, let me just play a move like h3. One of the ideas, you want to castle here and not allow white to play bishop g5, pinning the knight. Additionally, you might also want to play g5 and try to start pushing p on the king side and attacking. So it's a very flexible move. So after h6, we get the move rook to e1, and now we have bishop to a7. Amin plays b4, and here we get this move g5. Now, one of the great things about Arjun, I highlighted this in the first game, but I would point this out again here, is you'll notice the computer's like, what is this nonsense? White is just better here. It's 0.37. Why are you playing dubious moves, man? Why aren't you playing the best moves? Why are you getting worse? Now, the thing that's very important to understand in top-level chess is in many cases, a lot of what matters is who has the easier plans in a position versus what the 3500 computer thinks is the best move. And this is a good example because after g5, we got bishop e3. Here, Arjun trades the bishops, and now he goes for g4. We get knight to e1, and we have the move h5. Now, again, you'll notice the evaluation bar gives white an advantage here, but for Arjun, it's very easy to play. He simply wants to push his p on the king side, something like, just to illustrate it, something like h4, maybe a g3, knight g4, but maybe even just knight h5 and knight f4, maybe a queen g5, queen h6, but so many easy plans here for black, and white has to calculate many things here. You have to calculate, for example, do I play d4? Do I play b5? What is my plan? Whereas Arjun simply reacts to whatever Amin does here, and that makes it much easier to play. So we get d4. Arjun plays h4 here, and now we have this move bishop to e2. We get queen to e7, and the move d5. Arjun goes knight b8, we get knight d2, and now we have queen f8 being played. Now again, the computer set hates this line. It says white's winning here, but for Arjun it's very easy. He has one idea: queen h6 and g3. That's all he's going to do. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't, and that's life. Whereas Amin, he has to worry about this kingside attack. He also figure out, do I want to go c4, c5? Do I want to go a5, b5? White has to pick the plan, and Arjun has been really good at this, at creating these imbalanced positions, whereas opponents tend to struggle in finding the right idea. So we get knight f1, queen h6 is played. Now we have the move c4, g3 played here by Arjun. He could have played a5 as well, but he decides, you know what, he's going to fool send it here. He's got the double stack. He's going to attack on the h file and try to win the game. So we got takes, h3. Here Arjun plays knight d7, c5, knight f8, and now we get this move pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn is played, and we get the move queen c1. Now, this move is not the best move here, but this does highlight how difficult chess is, because of course the typical computer wants white to play rook a to a3, creating this very unusual double stack. Now, the reason Amin probably didn't do this is, first of all, he's worried about the bishop sack on h3 potentially, but even beyond the bishop sack, black can play knight to g6 here. Knight is going to f4, and it looks really bad. If you take with a rook, you lose the pawn on e4, and you're losing the game. If you play knight g3, knight f4, optically as a human, this looks horrible. Computer thinks after bishop f1 you're surviving, but when I look at this as a human, rook on g8 on the open file, it's great knife, all these threats towards the pawn in h3. Honestly, I'd be very scared to play this with white. I would think that I'm losing here. If I were playing this with white, I'd be like, I'm probably going to lose this game. But a computer, which is 3500, just laughs and says, no big deal, who cares, just queen c2, rook c3, there's no attacker, king is completely safe. But for us humans, we cannot understand that at the same level because we're simply not as good at chess. So in many cases, you'll see positions where a computer will give a massive advantage to one side, but that is not applicable at the human level. It's just not possible to play like that. So we get queen to c1 here. Arjun sacks the bishop, we get takes in this position, and now we have knight to g6. Amin plays the move rook takes pawn. Now we get knight to f4 here, and you'll notice that these knights are super active. Suddenly you've got a double stack. White's king very open. Also the knights here on the back rank very passive and not doing a whole lot. So we get queen to e3. Arjun takes the pawn. Amin sacks the rook. We got takes, and the move bishop f3. Now at this point we need to take stock of the position after rook c8, rook b1, where white has a knight and a bishop in return for a rook and a pawn. However, here, the knights, as you'll notice, are very, very passive. They're not super active, and black's knight is pressuring the pawns on e4 and d5, and black has an open file for the rook on c8, as well as open files galore for the rook on the h3 square. So we get rook to c3. Amin plays knight d2 here, and now we get to move king e7. a5 is played, and we have the move knight to d7. We get king to f2, and the move knight to f8. Now what Arjun is trying to do here is rotate this horse to f4 or h4. Amin at this point is actually not worse here, but he has to figure out what he's doing, because if black is given a bunch of moves, let's just say I play some waiting moves, you get some position like this, suddenly bishop's under pressure. Now there's also f5 here, there's also rook to h2, but white has to do something, whereas for Arjun, again, it's a very simple position where he has one plan. Just bring the knight to g6 and f4, or bring the knight to h4. So here Amin plays b5, we get to move knight to g6, takes, and now we get to move bishop g2. Arjun plays rook to h6 here. This move is very important because down the road, potentially, there might be a moment where you need something like the rook on h6 to guard the pawn on d6 from being captured, but also to maybe swing the rook to f6 as well. So we get rook to b7. Arjun plays king f8. We get rook b6, knight to f4 here. Now you see the point. The rook guards the pawn on d6. We get rook takes pawn, and here we have rook a3 being played. Again, very, very imbalanced position here. Black now only has a rook for a bishop and a knight, but because the rooks are so active, this rook on h6 going to h or f file, rook attacking the pawn on a5, rook a2 as well, I still think from a practical standpoint, this is easier for black to play. So we get rook a8, king g7, now we get a6 being played, and Arjun plays rook a2. Here we get the move knight f3, and now we have the great pawn sacrifice f5 here, trying to chip away at this white center. Now, what's funny about this position is computer still doesn't think that white is actually worse here, but from a human perspective, you have to find all the moves with white. Arjun does not really have to think about a whole lot. He's either going to take the pawn, push e4. In general, it's just a little bit too easy to play. So we get rook a7. Arjun goes back, we get check, king g7 check, and now we have the move king f6. And here Amin plays this move bishop to f1, and this is an epic mistake. Now, the line that draws the game here for white is to play the move rook to d7, which is not easy to play. Because after takes, you can take king g7, and here you can start checking once again. And after black goes king to f8 here, this very weird idea, bishop to f1, takes, and now after king takes f3, suddenly with this a pawn going up the board and all these checking ideas, white is completely fine. Now, is this realistic? No, of course not. No human would ever play this because it looks absolutely insane to sack the knight on f3. So after king to f6, we got bishop f1 instead, pawn takes pawn, and here we have the move bishop c4, get rook c2 from Arjun, and now Amin plays rook d7. Now this line would be completely fine if not for one huge issue here, as we're about to see. If black were to take on f3, for example, you would lose the game because after takes, king g7, I trade the rooks, I push p, and now you'll notice that after takes, the bishop covers d3 and a2, so the rook has no way of getting back to stop the white pawn from queening. And if you play something, if you were to take, I actually showed the last move by accident. If you were to play something like here, takes and rook d2, it's still the same thing. I take on f3. If you take, we transpose the other line. And after you play a move like knight to d5 here, I can simply go rook to d6, attacking the knight on d5. And after e4, king g3, you're going to lose the rook or the knight. I also have this a pawn going up the board still, and it's GG, why not? So, as I said, this would be completely losing or completely fine if not for one very important move here, and Arjun does not miss it. He finds rook to h3 here, and now suddenly both of these knights are really stuck here. The pawn attacks, this pawn attacks a knight, rook attacks knight, rook pins the other knight as well here, and suddenly white loses on the spot. So we get king e3 here from Amin, just to show you guys a sample line. If white were to push the pawn here, you can take this horse, no recapture due to this pin. If you go to e1, rook c1 is checkmate, king gets stuck. And if you go to g1 here, I can simply take the horse. If you make a queen, I check, and this classic ladder checkmate with the knight and the two rooks combining. And if you play rook takes d6 here, I can simply go king g5, and the rook g2, rook h3 idea is pretty much unstoppable. Maybe you can still survive for like 2 or 3 more moves with bishop f1, but rook d1 would also lead to a checkmate here after queen takes here, check, and then rook g2, and the knight covers the critical squares. So Amin plays king to e3, we get takes, we get knight to e4, king f5, knight takes pawn, king g6, and now we have the move bishop f1. And here Arjun puts the game away in style with this beautiful move, rook to e2, sacking the rook, because after white takes and goes back, you simply play rook to h1, knight guards the pawn, you're queening with check on the next turn, and it's GG, why not? So with this win, his second in a row, Arjun moves to 3.5 points out of 4. His live rating goes up to 2809.3, which is the 14th highest rating of all time. So now let's take a look at today's game being played in the 6th round. Arjun is on 4 points out of 5, 3 wins, 2 draws, I forgot to mention the 5th round where he drew. So he's on 4 points out of 5, and today in the 6th round he's playing as playing as Aravindh from India. Sorry for the confusion, you guys. So just to reiterate, so first round he wins against Vidit. He drew Levon Aroni round 2. Round 3 beat Alexei Serrano. Round 4, the game we just looked at, he beat Amin Tabatabai. And in round 5 he drew against Parham Magsudulu, also from Iran. And today in round 6 he's playing against Aravindh, his fellow countryman from India. Now, one of the things that I've said in many of my recaps, many of my streams even, about the Indian players is you have the big three. You've got Praggnanandhaa, Gukesh, and Arjun, who are simply leagues above everybody else. But on the other hand, what impressed me so much is there's a lot of players right around 2,700 who are Indian who have not reached their full potential yet. And that depth that they have below the big three is why I do think India is going to dominate chess for a long time. Now, Aravindh is someone who is actually well known as an up-and-coming junior or prodigy prior to the rise of the big three, but he really has stagnated in recent years. It's only in the last year or so he finally crossed the 2,700 mark, but he is someone that I do think has potential to go up quite a bit. So Arjun playing against Aravindh, and now we get the move d4. Arjun plays knight f6. We get bishop g5. This, of course, is what's known as the classic Trump house key opening. We get d5 and the move e3. Here, Arjun plays g6, and this is another example of Arjun living by the sword and dying by the sword, where he plays something that's a little bit dubious here versus the traditional lines with c5 and knight c6 and queen b6, which are completely fine, don't get me wrong, but they are much more drawish, because usually after c5, you'll get something like takes, e6, and after knight to f3, takes, and something like c4. Position is very, very dry from the get-go. So Arjun plays g6 because, of course, he's 2809. He wants to win every game. He wants to win the tournament. He wants to show everybody that he's the best player in the world. So we get knight to d2, bishop g7, knight to f3, and now we have the move castles. Aravindh plays bishop e2. We get c5, c3, and now the move b6, guarding the pawn on c5, but also potentially fianchettoing the bishop to b7 or a6. We get castles, bishop to b7, and now we have the move b4 being played by Aravindh. Now, b4 is a move that sort of asks black a big question. Do you want to trade the pawns and open up the c file for white? Do you want to push c4 and try to clog the toilet in the center of the board? Or do you want to basically play something like knight bd7 in the game, allowing white to trade and now play on this open b file? All options are completely fine objectively. I think the computer actually would prefer that black plays c4. I think it thinks that this is a little bit imprecise because after queen b3, you'll see from the evaluation bar that white is a little bit better. So we get queen c8, a4 is played here. Arjun plays h6, rook b1, bishop c6, and now we get the move bishop to f4, stopping black from playing rook to b8. Arjun plays g5, we get bishop to e5, and now we have the move c4 here. Aravindh plays queen to a3, we get the move rook to e8, guarding the pawn on e7 from being captured, and now we get the move h3. Now, at this point, apparently white is much better here, and the reasoning I think is that it's right here, black should go g4 and simply get rid of this London bishop on the dark square diagonal, and after knight d7, bishop g4, bishop e5, apparently black is better. Honestly, this is a very double-edged position. I look at something like this, and I'm really confused as to exactly what is going on here. All kinds of stuff hanging everywhere in the middle of the board, so I'm really unsure about this, who's better even, but this would have been the right choice. So after we get rook e8 and h3, now the problem here for Arjun is that if he doesn't do anything about the bishop, you say go king h7 and white gets bishop h2. Now the bishop stays alive on the diagonal because you played h3 to create the square, and the London bishop is very strong. Additionally, if you take the bishop here, now after knight takes e5, you've got this great bastion. White can even play something like f4 here to start attacking on the f file, and white is actually much better. So we get bishop to f8. Here, Aravindh plays queen a2, Arjun plays g4, we get takes, and now we have the move bishop g3 back, keeping the bishop alive on the diagonal. Arjun plays bishop g7, and here we get the move rook to e1, and now we have knight f8 being played. At this point, Aravindh plays knight h2. Now, this move is fine. Computer wants to move e4 here, sacking a pawn and even sacking a knight here, because after takes, apparently after knight takes f3, white is better with the rook in return for the bishop and the knight here, since both rooks are on open files. Instead, we get knight to h2, Arjun trades, and now we get the move e5 being played. Aravindh takes, we get takes, and the move knight to f3, rook to e6, and now rook a d1. Now the problem for Arjun here is he's taking a lot of liberties trying to create imbalances, but for Aravindh, he actually has a very easy position to play. Arjun has these stuck pawns on d5 and c4. White can create a bash, and your king is also a little bit naked with these pawns, nothing covering the king up, and it's really hard to play. So Arjun goes bishop b7. We get knight to d4, rook to g6 here, and now we get to move bishop h5, rook g5, and queen to e2, guarding the bishop on h5, but preparing to maybe even play f4. Game continues with queen d7. We get f4, rook g7, and now Aravindh plays queen c2, trying to put the knife on f5 here. Arjun plays knight e6, we get knight to f5, and now we have rook h7, and here Aravindh plays the move e4. Now unfortunately at this point it's becoming abundantly clear that Arjun is in really bad shape, and he's probably going to lose this game because he's just not getting the imbalance he needs. So Arjun takes on f4. Aravindh takes his pawn on d5, the correct move by the way, sacking the bishop on h5, because now if black were to take, you have rook to e7, creating the kebab, queen c8 to guard the bishop, and now white can simply play, I think there are many ways to win, but I think d6 d7 is very good potentially. Even queen f2, which is the other move to go knight d6, is very strong here, and black is in all kinds of trouble. So Arjun plays f6 here, trying to stop either knight to e7 or rook to e7, and now we get to move bishop g4. Arjun plays queen d8, we get to move rook to d4, and now we have knight d3 being played. Aravindh plays rook to f1 here, avoiding hanging the rook on e1 while guarding the knight and the bishop on f5 and g4 respectively. We get to move knight to e5, and here Aravindh plays bishop h3. Arjun goes king h8, and now we get to move d6, pushing p up the board. Now this move looks very good, but on the other hand, it is a little bit risky because you now open up the long diagonal for the bishop, and maybe, just maybe, Arjun can get a miracle. So we have queen g8. Aravindh plays rook to f4, we get queen to g5, and now we have this move knight to e7 here, a very effective move with the pawn holding the knight on e7 and the double stack going after the pawn on f6. So Arjun plays rook to g7, and now we get to move rook takes pawn here, and unfortunately for Arjun, even though he's having a great turn, Aravindh does not see the boogeyman. It would be very easy to see takes and worry about, I don't know, queen f3, queen h3, and it's like you think there's something bad happening. This does not work, by the way, because after queen to e3, queen f2 takes. White has a very nice in-between move, knight to g6, checking the king. If you take with the horse, you lose the queen, as you cannot capture the king. And if you take with the rook here, after rook takes, now the queen's still under attack. There's also queen f6 check coming in, and black will lose heavy material and the game in short order. So Arjun goes rook h8, and now we get knight takes rook. Arjun takes, and here we get the move rook to f8. Another excellent move here from Aravindh, just getting rid of the last heavy piece, heavy rook on the board, I should say, in this position. Without a rook, queen, and bishop, with only a queen and bishop trying to attack, you're never getting through with the checkmate. So here we get knight d3, Aravindh trades, and now we get d7 here, pushing p up the board. Arjun plays queen e3, and here Aravindh ends the game in style with this queen sack, queen f2, doing a classic Botez gambit here, where black takes the queen, you promote the pawn to a new queen, and then you simply take the horse. You have an extra rook on the board, and the rest will be very simple. So after queen to f2, Arjun has to resign this game. Very unfortunate loss for him. Felt like he was trying to be super creative, super aggressive in this game, trying to ride the wave, and he gets soundly punished by Aravindh. Very impressive game from Aravindh, by the way. Very smooth game. Comes back to what I said before we started looking at this game, where I think Aravindh has great potential. The ceiling, I think, is pretty high, and I do expect him to go up quite a bit above just the 2,700 mark. So for Arjun, with that loss, he is now 4 points out of 6. His rating drops all the way back to 2801.8 currently. He has one more game tomorrow with the white piece against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. If he wins that game, he'll probably surpass me once again to number 3. I don't think it'll be enough to surpass Fabiano and get back to number 2, but at any rate, it's going to be very exciting to see how he recovers from the shocking loss in this round, in the 6th round, and finishes off in the tournament. So a couple of other notes before we round off, so I'm sure people want some general opinions. My view of Arjun's play is that he's playing chess the way it should be played. He's being very creative. Even now that he's in the top 5 in the world, top 10, top 5, whatever it is, he's playing very creatively. He's not suddenly starting to play 1 or 2 systems every game. He's remaining creative, being very unpredictable, and I really like his style. The stylistic choices that he's making are very good objectively, so I'm very impressed by that. I think the only thing that he needs to figure out is how to sort of shut it down, where he can be super solid versus always needing to try and win every single game. Because I do think that some of the games that he won in this tournament, specifically against Serrano or against Vidit, if he were playing against an absolute top player like Magnus, Fabiano, or myself, I think he would have probably lost those games. So that's maybe the one thing that he needs to work on. The other thing I would say is, for all the people out there who are not super familiar with the ratings, the way chess ratings work is that your rating is a snapshot of where you're at today. So if your rating is 2800 today, that means you're playing at 2800 level. But we have to wait and see what the future holds before we start anointing Arjun as the greatest player. Levy, for example, in a recent video, he was saying that Arjun basically has ended the Magnus era of classical chess. That is simply a clickbait. That is very, very far from the truth. Magnus is still the gold standard. He's still the strongest player in the world. For Arjun, I expect one of two things to happen. Either Arjun is going to play against the absolutely elite players, maintain his rating, and prove that he's top 5 in the world, which is actually what I think will happen. That's my baseline scenario. Or he's going to struggle against the absolute top players, lose points, but be able to dominate these 2650, 2700 players and maintain his rating that way. So it's very unclear what the future holds. I think we have to wait and see. But I really, what I would say is, I think we should hold our jets on whether Arjun is going to take over and be the absolute best player in the world until we see him play the top turns. But we desperately want to see him play against the Magnuses and the Fabianos of the world, and then it'll be much easier to draw clear conclusions versus the over-the-top sensationalism that we have right now at this moment. So on that note, I hope you guys enjoyed this recap of the games that Arjun Erigaisi has played in the Chennai Grandmasters tournament being held in India this week. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with some more great recaps and content in the very near future. So I hope you guys enjoyed it and have a great rest of your weekend. See you guys. Bye.